If you own a classic car, or you're restoring a classic car, or you're just trying to maintain your classic car, rust is going to be a part of your program. We're going to show you how to fix it today. I'm here with Steve from Brothers Trucks. Steve, we've got tools in front of us, but tell me what we're going to be doing today.
So we're going to repair some rust on this fender we have in front of us, but really the best way to repair rust is to be prepared ahead of time. So we've got some grinders. We're going to use those to cut the metal. We've got some clamps. We use those to clamp our new patch panel in place. Got our protective gear, glasses and gloves that are necessary. We've got a scribe as well as a pen, pencil, and something with a straight edge so we can mark our areas we're going to take off. And also, we've got our new metal.
And our trusty metal glue gun there, the MIG welder.
That's true, and we're going to let you operate that. All right, so that's pretty much it. And let's just take a look at what we have here to work with. All right, so when we're talking about best practices for repairing rust, you did this earlier. You kind of grabbed this panel and you slapped it on here. And I think you were explaining, oh yeah, we're just going to hack this off right here and replace this. Well, that's really not best practices. Best practices for repairing rust is identifying where your rust is and just taking out what you need to take out to get rid of the rust. Leave as much of the original metal as you can in there. And then we've got a brace back here. We're going to see how bad that is, decide if we're going to replace it or not. And there's some steps that you want to take if you end up needing to replace the brace. There's some steps you want to maybe put in front of some other steps so you have your overall length remain the same throughout the process.
Absolutely, yeah, and that's one of the most important parts of this. You need to maintain some sort of a reference point here when you do this work to make sure that your fender is the correct length. We don't want to end up with a fender that has this end 3 inches longer than the
Exactly,
front of the thing.
Exactly. So just for instance, if you're going to end up having to replace the brace, you're going to want to replace the brace first. Use your remaining metal here on your fender to identify how long that brace. Use that as a reference point. Put your brace in there, get it cut right, and get your brace set up. And then repair your outside metal. Now, if you're going to repair just the outside metal, like we're probably going to do today, we're going to leave that brace there as our reference point. So when we put that new metal on, we know exactly where it goes.
Gotcha.
All right?
Well, let's begin the surgery, Doctor.
All right. So the first thing we're going to do is I'm going to get my marker as well as something with a straight edge. We're going to come in here and we're going to eyeball the rust. And we've already looked at this from the back, so we know where the rust is in the back. But we're going to eyeball the rust. And then what I'm going to do is just make some sort of rough lines on here to kind of let us know where we're going to be cutting this out. And we'll take just about like that and try to keep the lines as straight as possible, because when you're cutting with the die grinder or whatever you're going to use to cut this, I mean, you're not going to want to be making a bunch of swoopy lines and stuff. We really want to be able to make a straight line, hack it off. So I think that'll just about do it. And now we're just going to break some of the welds loose back here and on the bottom of this brace, and then we're going to get to work with the grinder.
Cool.
All right.
So we rolled our fender over, and when we did, we actually discovered some rust on the brace. We weren't initially planning on replacing part of the brace, but we found that rust. Steve, like every other rust repair project known to man, there's always more than you think. Right,
and it's always good to get rid of all of it. I mean, this is pretty minor, but reality is that's just going to get worse and worse over time. So while we're in here doing surgery, might as well go ahead and do that. And you can see, like we mentioned before, the brace came this long, but we're not going to use all of it. We're just going to use what we need, so we went up a little ways. And I will mention that our intention is to take the fender off about here. So what we did is we took a little bit more of the brace so we don't have those two seams in the same spot. The brace will be about 1 inch higher than that, so we aren't welding those back together and making a weak spot.
Absolutely, and as far as our reference point went, we talked a little bit about the fact that if we didn't have to replace this brace, the original brace would be our reference to replace the outer skin of the fender, but since we did, we used what remained of the outer skin to make sure our brace is in the right place.
Right, and so now we're in the right spot. Our hole's going to be back in the right spot, so when we go to mount the fender, it's going to be great. And with the new brace in place, we'll be able to very easily identify the reference point for when we do the outer piece.
Perfect.
All right, let's get this welded up, and then we'll take off the rest of the fender and flip it over.
Okay.
All right.
We're going to clean up this weld. We'll be back after the break to continue our rust repair on this fender. Nice work. Welcome back to Motorhead Garage, presented by Dustless Blasting. As you can see, Steve just finished cutting off our rusted outer skin of the fender. You can see that our repaired brace is kind of hanging out back there. He was very careful not to touch that brace when he was making his cut, and now he's going to lay that patch panel on there just to kind of be able to lay a scribe mark down, right?
Right, that's sort of it. We have our brace now as the reference point. So I'll slide this up here, make sure that that's butted up on the brace. And then I'll take the scribe that we have, and I'm just going to get under here and make a scribe line so we have something to cut from.
Nice panel, real heavy gauge steel. I mean, it totally matches the factory, the factory gauge. So it's
right.
Good quality piece.
Sure. Now that we have that, we'll use a die grinder, cut along this line, then we'll have a perfect piece to fit back in here and butt it up. Now, back in the old days, a lot of guys would do like a recessed overlap weld, and that was great back then, but what happened is a lot of those repairs that happened back in the 90s ended up catching water or debris in between that overlap and rusting out much later, and then we find ourselves doing this again. So common practice now is to butt these two pieces of metal together and then stitch weld them, much like you did with the brace in the back of the fender.
Manage the heat by just basically making spots along the way and working your way to fill in the whole space.
Right, yeah, so you don't overheat it, because otherwise you overheat it, it warps like crazy, and then what you end up with is a bunch of Bondo filling your perfectly good metal. So let me go hack this off, and we'll come back. I'll let you stitch this back on.
So we get the panel cut. Steve fitted it. I've been putting some stitch welds in it, just kind of some quick tacks.
You're a better welder than me, but you're still not the best welder. And so this is a really great example of it doesn't have to be perfect. The guy at home who isn't a great welder, but he can stitch along, this is a perfect job for him, because let's face it, we weren't going for a pure metal, paint over metal. We're going to have to use some body filler on here anyway. Everyone is. This is what's going to happen anyhow. So it doesn't have to be perfect. And, we've got a couple little air pockets here. We'll go back and fill those later. But let's get this finished up, finish the stitching on this side. We'll turn it over and show the people at home how to do a rosette weld to refasten that brace we put on there earlier.
Fantastic.
All right.
Close your eyes. All right, so we got our fender turned back over, and Steve, talk to me what I'm looking at here. I see some cuts, and I see some spots right here we're going to be working with.
So yeah, we flipped it over, did a little cleanup. We had a couple holes. It's thin metal. We're not great welders, but it's bound to happen.
Trial by fire.
Anyway,
baby.
We've clamped everything in place. What I did is I took our die grinder, I made a couple cuts here so it'll be easier to fold over our metal. We'll also be able to use those cuts kind of as a guide where to weld and replicate our spot welds that the factory had.
Sure.
Then down here, what I've done is taken a drill, kind of sunk it in, not all the way through, and then what we'll be able to do is weld right in the middle of that. That's called a rosette weld, and that'll really mimic the factory spot welds that this brace and fender would have been mated together with before.
Got to thank Black Label Coatings for blasting these fenders for us, getting all the junk out of the way, and getting us a nice surface to work with. Go to brotherstrucks.com. You can learn about everything these guys have going on, whether we're talking patch panels or the myriad of products they offer for Chevrolet and GMC pickup trucks through all generations. Steve, thank you so much for coming in today.
Thanks, man.
I'm going to hit these rosette welds, and we'll be back with more Motorhead Garage presented by Dustless Blasting after this.